All right, good evening. We are back for another Bible story session. And last time we have told the story of the bleeding woman and how her faith had made her well, and that Jesus was compassionate on her. And we discussed just some of his compassion for those on the outside of society and just what that calls us to do as we come to know Christ more. And so this week, we're actually going to go right back into Mark 5. And what we didn't mention previously was that the story of the bleeding woman actually is smack dab in the middle of another story. And that other story is what we're going to discuss this week because it is beautiful all the same and just deserves to be told as well. So we're back in Mark 5 after we've seen Jesus do all of these things. And right here, as I'm looking, that's when I'm checking my scripture. And so we look and we see that Jesus has crossed back into Galilee, and the great crowds have gathered around him. And as this crowd had gathered, one of the rulers of the synagogue, his name was Jairus, saw him, fell at his feet, and earnestly said, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and she may live." And he went with them. Well, on the way from Jairus coming to Jesus and saying, "My daughter is dying," we see that this is where the bleeding woman is kind of interceding in here in this middle of this passage. So we get the story of the bleeding woman here. And then as that happens, Jesus still has compassion on her. And then he returns to his original plan, which is original in its entirety. However, we go right back into verse 35 after the story of the bleeding woman. And Jesus was still speaking, as he was still speaking to the crowd, and as they're trying to transition and move on to Jairus' house, people came from the ruler's house and they had said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler, said to Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, he said, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you all making a commotion and weeping? This child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha, Koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement, and he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. And that is the story. That is the story of Jesus healing Jairus' daughter. And I just wanted to ask, how do we think this correlates? Well, before I get to that, what do you think are the initial kind of takeaways from this story and the actions that Jesus does here?
The initial thing I grabbed from it is he goes into the house and the people don't have the faith to trust in him as the Messiah. They just assume she's dead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you were to, if you all were gathering because this child was sick, right? Like, and they've seen Jesus this far healing these people that are ill, But up until this point, we've not necessarily, at least in Mark's account, we haven't seen him raise someone from the dead, right? So, I mean, in no way do they think that he is, fully capable of. I think death is so permanent and so unchangeable on earth, right? There's nothing we can do, right? There's definites in life, and it's death. And that is the one thing we are all not aiming towards, but on the path towards. And then I also wanted to ask, how do we think these actions kind of correlate or compare to our previous story of Jesus healing the bleeding woman? Are there any comparisons? How do we see Jesus's similarities and interactions with both of them? Anything that stands out or importance in between both of those?
Just Christ's all-powerful ability to instantly heal.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. We see the physical healing in both sides of that. I think it's also so interesting to realize that Jesus didn't stop what he was doing, but he still paused enough to have compassion on the bleeding woman on the way to this child. And I think that kind of can tell us the importance of God's love for his people. Like, his love is the same regardless, because he is the same regardless. But Christ is able to do these miraculous things and planned on doing both, right? Like, he knew he was going to do these things. And in doing so, he was able to show the same compassion for the little girl, which I think we can all kind of have a tendency on to feel like we have more compassion for kids and stuff as well. But he also showed that same compassion to the bleeding woman who was not receiving compassion from anybody. And I think that's a good reminder of what we're called to in terms of loving those that aren't someone that we would necessarily be in direct association with, or a group with, or just familiar with in general. He constantly loved those that we weren't expected to. And then, but the same with like the ruler's son. He was a leader in the synagogue, right? So in what way was he able to profess like the claims of Christ? We're not sure. We don't see he's taking someone who is a religious leader at the time and able to do the same for him and show him compassion and love. And there are just so many things between both of these stories, but I love the story of the girl, and he just says, arise and go. Is there any other takeaways or thoughts or questions from these, or what he's showing you in this story that you might not have seen before? So, all right. Well, that will be the conclusion of this story as well. So, thank you for listening, and we are excited for one more story.